Hey boys and girls, if you missed the Zoom meeting this morning, this is a short lesson on Module 10, Lesson 5, and this lesson is about writing a word problem to represent a whole number divided by a unit fraction. Okay, before we begin on that, we need to know that there are three different ways we can write a division problem, but the parts are still the same when we name the parts of them. The part that's, when we write it as a sentence like this, we start out with a dividend. That's the part that's being divided by the divisor. And the divisor can tell us one of two things, either how many groups there are or how much is in each group. And then we get our quotient. A dividend can also be written inside of a division box. The divisor goes on the outside and the quotient will be written on top. And a division problem can even be written as a fraction, where the numerator would be the top number. It'd be like a dividend divided by the denominator, which is our divisor, and then whatever that will be equal to would be the quotient. Okay, and we saw a lot of these when we were doing improper fractions. If we had 10/5, we know that's the same as 10 divided by 5, and our quotient would be 2. All right, so that would be an example of that particular type. All right, so far in math, here's what we have been talking about when we are dividing. We can have a dividend that's a whole number divided by another whole number to get our quotient. What's an example of that? Well, the example we have here is if we have a situation with 3 pizzas that are shared by 5 kids, what does the quotient tell us? Well, 3 pizzas shared by 5 kids is going to be 3 divided by 5. And so this answer, 3/5, is going to tell us how much of a pizza each kid is going to get. And we can draw a model of that to make sure we understand just exactly what this is talking about. All right, so we're starting out with 3 pizzas. That's what's being shared. That's our dividend. These represent our 3 pizzas. They're going to be divided evenly between 5 kids. So I'm just going to 1, 2, 3, 4. So that chops each of them into 5 parts. So I know that each kid is going to get this much from each of those pizzas. And that will be 3 of the 1/5 size pieces. So each kid will get 3/5 of a pizza. All right, and then another type of division problem we worked on started out with a unit fraction for the dividend divided by a whole number. What does that mean that our quotient will tell us? Well, let's take this example here. Let's say we had a half a lasagna left over, and I'm going to model that with this box over here. That's half of our lasagna. Since I'm starting with a fraction, I'm going to shade that to represent the half. And it has to be divided up into 3 equal parts. So I'm going to divide that 1/2 into 3 equal parts, but in order to do that, I'm going to carry it all the way across so I know what size those pieces are. So if I take a half and I divide it into 3 groups, then this answer is going to tell me how much is going to be in each of those groups. So I'm going to look in each group, and each group has 1 out of 6. So I know that if I have a half of a lasagna and I chop it into 3 equal pieces, those pieces are only going to be 1/6 of the whole lasagna. And then the last type that we've looked at, we started out with a whole number as the dividend, and it was divided up into pieces that were the size of a fraction, unit fraction. And so what is our quotient going to tell us in this situation? Well, let's take 3 pies as an example. Let's say we start out with 3 whole pies, and we're going to divide them into this size of a piece, 1/4. So I'm going to divide each of these pies over here into 1/4 size pieces. So if I know the size of the pieces that I'm splitting it out into, then what the quotient is going to tell me in this case is how many of those pieces I have. So I didn't shade any of it. I'm just simply showing that if I have 3 pies and I cut them into 1/4 size pieces, that I'm going to have 4, 8, 12 slices of these pies. I'm going to have 12 for an answer. All right, so when we use division that involves fractions and whole numbers, or even fractions and fractions, we can help understand the word problem by drawing a model. All right, so in this particular lesson, I want you to, this is on page 257 of your workbook page. The whole point of this is to write a word problem. You're creating a story using a visual fraction model to interpret the division of a whole number by a unit fraction. So we're trying to come up with some kind of a word problem that shows that I understand how to divide a whole number by a unit fraction. So let's say like the whole number 5 divided by a unit fraction. Being able to make up a word problem for that. All right, so let's look at this first little bit of information we're going to have. It says Carlos has a honey jar. Write a word problem about the honey jar that can be modeled by this expression. How can a visual model be used to solve the problem? Now, we don't have a word problem. We just have some bits of information that we're going to use to make a word problem. So here we have 5 pounds of honey. And I'm going to have to take this 5 pounds and I'm going to have to split it out into 1/2 pound sizes. So I need to come up with a word problem that would use this to come up with an answer. So I know I'm going to have 5 pounds. I'm going to divide it into 1/2 pounds sizes, and I want to know how many of those will I have. So I'm going to think, okay, I've got 5 jars. So draw your 5 jars. Each of these are going to represent 1 pound, my 5 pounds. And I'm going to put it into smaller size containers. I want to sort it all out into 1/2 pound sizes. So I'm going to split each of these into a half. So if this is my 5 pounds and I split them each into a half, how many of the 1/2 pound sizes do I have? Well, I'm going to have 10 of them. All right, so I need to write a word problem for that. We can say Carlos had 5 pounds of honey. He put 1/2 pound of honey into smaller containers. How many smaller jars did he use? All right, so I'm going to say that Carlos had 5 pounds of honey and he was going to put them into smaller jars. So he put 1/2 pound of honey into smaller jars. How many jars did he use? And I left out the word jars. Well, he would need 10 jars to put 1/2 pound of honey in each one. Okay, on the turn and talk, it says, how does dividing a whole number by a unit fraction differ from dividing a unit fraction by a whole number? Let's make sense of what that's asking. We're comparing the difference between dividing a whole number by a unit fraction. Well, let me have a whole number. I'm going to pick 2. That's a whole number. Divided by a unit fraction, I'm going to say 1/2. All right, well, that means I've got 2 whole things, like 2 pies, and I'm going to divide them into half-size pieces. So I've got my 2 whole pies. I've divided them into pieces that are a half of a piece of pie each. And my answer, my quotient, is going to tell me how many of those pieces that I have. So this much is going to be in each of the group. And my answer is going to tell me how many of those groups I have. So I would have 4. Now I'm going to compare that to if I was dividing a unit fraction by a whole number. I'm going to start off with a dividend of a unit fraction of 1/2. And I'm going to divide it by a whole number. Okay, so this is a whole different story. This means I'm starting out with only a half of something. I've only got a half of something, half of a pie or a cake, and I'm going to cut that half into 2 pieces. So that tells me how many groups I have. I have 2 groups that I've cut it into. 1 group, 2 groups. What this quotient is going to tell me is how much is in each of those groups. Well, if I look at how much is in one group, I see that it's 1. And what size is the piece? Well, it's 4 equal parts there, so it's 1/4. It's 1/4 of whatever the whole thing was. Okay, so this is how those two situations differ. All right, let's look at the back side. All right, here we have a bit of information to write another word problem out. We have Elsa, who uses a plank of wood to make a craft project at the community center. Write a word problem, or what word problem can you write about a plank of wood that can be modeled by 3 divided by 1/4? All right, well, I can say that a plank of wood is 3 feet long. Elsa has a plank of wood 3 feet long. She cuts it into lengths that are this size. So she wants this size of a length. She cuts it into lengths of 1/4 foot. How many smaller boards will she have? All right, so once again, I'm starting out with the 3 for my dividend. So how do the quantities, which means an amount, represent the dividend? Well, my 3 feet represent my dividend. And my 1/4 tells me the size that I'm cutting each of the little smaller boards into. This tells me the size of each piece. So my divisor tells the size of each piece. And I'm left with my quotient. What is my quotient going to tell me? Well, my quotient, what is it going to be? Well, let me draw a model and see what it is. I'm going to separate my boards because that's easier for me to picture. That's 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. So that's my 3 feet long plank. And I'm going to divide it into boards that are 1/4 of a foot. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I know each of those are fourths. I'm not going to shade anything in because once I've got that divided into those 1/4 size pieces, I just want to know how many of those individual pieces will I have. Well, I can see that there's going to be 4, 8, 12. So I know that 3 divided by 1/4 is equal to 12 pieces. All right, so my 12 tells me the number of pieces, or groups. You could think of it as the number of groups. Okay, we're going to use the visual model to write a division equation. Well, actually, we did that right here, but we will write it again. And we're going to interpret what the quotient means. 12 pieces that are each 1/4 foot in length. Okay. So you can stop the video and re-go over that if you need that a little bit slower. But we're going to go on just for the sake of time. All right, in this one, in Turn and Talk, we have a situation where Elsa writes a word problem for 3 divided by 1/2. So 3 whole somethings is being divided up into half size pieces. Mr. Grant tutors 3 students after school. He divides his time among the students equally. If the tutoring session lasts for 1/2 hour, how long will he spend with each student? Well, I know that if 3 is the dividend in Elsa's word problem, then the 3 is what's going to be divided up. And I know the only thing in this story that has 3 are 3 students. So Mr. Grant is not going to divide up the 3 students. What is he going to divide up? Well, he's going to split up this 1/2 hour of time, and he's going to split that up between his 3 students. And what the answer is going to tell me is what part of an hour he's going to spend with each kid. So if I'm going to represent 1/2 hour. I have 1/2 hour. I'm going to split it between 3 kids. How much is going to be in each of those groups? So here's group 1, group 2, group 3 for my 3 kids, and that's going to be, each kid's going to have 1 out of 6 of an hour, 1/6 of an hour. And 1/6 of an hour is 10 minutes. All right, let's go on to the next problem on page 259. And we have a person, Lynn, who is preparing some appetizers for a party. We have to write a word problem about the appetizers that can be modeled by this expression. All right, so I'm not answering the question here. It's not just about saying 2 divided by 1/8. It's figuring out what can be represented by 2. This is 2 whole things, and they're going to be cut into this size of a piece. So I'm thinking of something I might use as appetizers. I might use sub sandwiches from Subway. So I'm thinking I could have 2 sub sandwiches, and I could cut them up into 1/8 size pieces. And then the answer that I was going to get would tell me how many of those little sandwiches I would have to serve as appetizers. So that might be a good word problem for this. All right, so I'm going to say buy 2 sub sandwiches that's not how you spell that. Buy 2 sub sandwiches and cut them into 1/8 size pieces. How many pieces, how many little, because those are going to make really little sandwiches, do I have for appetizers? All right, so it says which quantities in the story represent the dividend. Now, quantity is an amount. So the quantity that represents the dividend is going to be 2. 2 is my dividend. It's my 2 sub sandwiches. I'm going to draw those down here. 1 sub, 2 subs. The 1/8 tells me the size of each piece. P-I-E-C-E, piece. All right, and so I'm going to cut my subs into 1/8 size pieces. So go ahead and do that. Now we can see that the quotient is going to be answered by counting up the number of pieces. So I've got 8 of them here and 8 of them here, so I know I'm going to have 16 pieces or small sandwiches. Describe the number of equal parts in your visual model and what they represent. Well, we have 16 smaller pieces, and that's going to be how many I have for appetizers. And use your work to write a division equation. Well, we know we're going to have the 2 whole sandwiches divided up into 8ths, and I'm going to end up with 16 pieces for appetizers. Okay, let's look at Step It Out on page 260. Here we have Zoe who wants to make some raisin cookies, and she has a stick of butter. This looks just like the package on a stick of butter, and I can see that it has 8 tablespoons in it. It says here I want to write a word problem using the stick of butter that can be modeled by the expression 8 divided by 1/3. Well, I can see I have 8 tablespoons of butter. And if I'm making cookies, I might want to say that's going to be very small parts. 8 divided into 1/3 means that each of these tablespoons has to be divided into 3 smaller parts. So that would be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Each tablespoon is divided into thirds. So I can see that those are going to be very small amounts of butter if I split each of these tablespoons into 1/3 tablespoons. And I can see that I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 22, 23, 24. I'm going to have 24 1/3 tablespoons of butter. And so what kind of a story could that be? Well, it might be that I could need 1/3 of a tablespoon of butter for each cookie. So I could say Zoe is making cookies with 1 stick of butter. The stick has 8 tablespoons, and that abbreviation for tablespoons is capital TBSP, tablespoons, in it. She needs 1/3 tablespoon for each cookie. How many cookies can she make? Bless you, puppies. Shh. Shh. Now we are to draw a visual model to show the quotient. Well, I'm just going to draw one gigantic stick of butter. And I need you to draw that also. Maybe yours will look a little neater. And I'm going to mark off the 8 tablespoons. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're just going to pretend those are all partitioned equally. Okay, now I have to draw this, I have to show this divided up into thirds. So I'm just going to do it this way. There's my 1/3 all the way across, and then 2/3, and then 3/3. So all of them have now, each of those tablespoons have been divided into thirds. And so I can see each one of these would represent a cookie, enough butter for a cookie. And so I know there's going to be 3 times 8 in there, which is 24. So I can make 24 cookies with this. So the quotient, what is the quotient telling me? 24 cookies can be made with 8 tablespoons of butter. Okay, and once again, you can stop the video and re-go over that to make sure that you understand it. We're going to go ahead and look at check understanding because we're already at 23 minutes and 50 seconds, so let's move on. So here we have Rami, he buys some apples. We're going to write a word problem that can be modeled by the expression 4 divided by 1/6, and then draw a visual model to find the quotient. All right, well, I know if I'm going to have apples here, then this 4 has to represent something about apples. It could be 4 apples or 4 pounds of apples. All right, so I'm going to think about splitting apples up and making something that would require 1/6 of apples. So I'm going to say this is 4 pounds of apples. So I've got 4 pounds of apples, and I need 1/6 of a pound to make an apple pie. And I want to know how many pies can I make if I've got 4 pounds. All right, so that will be 4 pounds of apples. Oops, let's make a word problem. Okay, Rami has 4 pounds of apples. he needs 1/6 of a pound to make a pie. I want to know how many pies he can make. How many pies can he make? All right, so I know I'm starting out with 4 pounds. I know the amount that I need in each of those pies. And now I just need to find out, well, how many can he make with 4 pounds of apples. So that's going to be 4 divided by 1/6. So I'm going to draw my pies. Or no, I'm not drawing my pies. No, that's a mistake. I'm not drawing my pies. I'm going to draw my 4 pounds of apples. 1 pound of apple, 2 pounds of apples, 3 pounds of apples, 4 pounds of apples. And then I know that each of these pounds of apples need to be broken up into 6. All right, so each of these separate parts, each of those 6 tell me how many pies you can make, because it only takes 1/6 of a pound to make a pie. So I know I've got 6 times 4, which is 24. All right, so I know he can make 24 pies with the 4 pounds of apples. 4 divided by 1/6 is equal to 24. All right, let's find the quotient for each of these problems. And I'm sure you're seeing a pattern now, that when we start with the whole number and we divide by a unit fraction, now remember this is only true when we're dividing by a unit fraction, that we're going to end up with a whole number for the quotient. So here I've got 7 of something, 7 whole units, and I'm going to divide them up into thirds. If I'm dividing them up into thirds, I know there's going to be 3 in each one of these. So essentially what I'm doing is saying, well, that's 7 of these times the 3. And I know that's going to be 21 of those little pieces. So I know that 7 divided into thirds is going to be 21. The same thing here. I know if I'm starting out with a whole number and I'm dividing it by a unit fraction, that my quotient is going to also be a whole number. And so I know if I have 9 of something, nine pies, and I'm cutting them all up into fifths, how many of those sections will I have? Well, I'm going to have 45 of those sections. All right, if you take a look at page 261, this is on your own, but we're going to start you out before you are doing some by yourself. You're going to write a word problem about pizza that can be modeled using the expression 7 divided by 1/8. Well, that's one you can do on your own, so go ahead and do that one. All right, and down here, I think that you will move through these 3 rather quickly. I always recommend drawing a model for the division. With the multiplication stuff, model's not so necessary, but to make sure you understand what this is meaning and getting your right answer, think about a model for those division. All right, so you're going to do these by yourself. All right, on use tools, we want to consider this by drawing a model to find the quotient. There are 5 sandwiches on a platter. 1 serving is 1/4 of a sandwich. How many servings are there? Well, I'm going to model this because I'm drawing a visual model. There's sandwich 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I know each one is cut into fourths. Now I'm asking myself, how many fourths are there in those 5 sandwiches? Well, there's 4, 8, 12. Wait a minute. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. There. So there's 20 of those smaller size sandwiches there, the pieces. So that tells me that 5 divided by 1/4 will equal 20. All right, in this one, it's asking us to attend to precision. So that means we're really paying close attention to this word problem to see if it makes sense. Ian writes a word problem that can be modeled by the expression 2 divided by 1/3. and he wants to know, does this word problem match this expression? It says, Michaela has 2 jars of peanut butter. She needs 1/3 of a cup for 1 batch of oatmeal bites. How many batches of oatmeal bites can she make? Well, let's see. I see I have 2 jars, and for each batch of oatmeal bites, she needs 1/3 of a cup. Well, since this says 2 jars, I don't know how many cups are in each of those jars, and I would need to know how many cups of peanut butter are in those 2 jars. So this word problem does not quite match this. It doesn't. Now we could fix it so that it did. If we so let's just answer that. No, it does not match. How could we fix it? All right, we can change jars to cups, and that would make it work. So if this said Michaela has 2 cups of peanut butter, she needs 1/3 cup for each batch of oatmeal bites. How many batches of oatmeal bites can she make? Then it would work. All right, we can change jars to cups to make it correct. All right, and so if I wanted to solve that, I know that would be 2 cups divided by 1/3. That would be 6. I would have 6 batches that I could make. All right, but I would have to fix that. All right, on the back side of that, on 261, you're going to solve, you're going to write a word problem for this, number 11, and you're going to answer each of these questions about it. Okay, we're going to do 10 together, so let's hang in there and you're almost done. Here we have Rami. He divides a whole number by a unit fraction and then divides the quotient by another unit fraction. Is the second quotient less or greater than the original? All right, when they give me that much information, I want to write an example for myself so that I can make sense out of it and just take it a step at a time. Rami divides a whole number by a unit fraction. Well, let me come up with a whole number. I'm just going to make one up off the top of my head, and I'm going to say 5. And he's going to divide it by a unit fraction. All right, I'm going to say 1/2. All right, so I'm going to say 5 divided by 1/2. I know if I have 5 of something and I cut it in half, I'm going to have 10 of those pieces. All right, so after Rami did that, it said, then he divides the quotient. Okay, here's the quotient. He's going to take that quotient and he's going to divide it by another unit fraction. So I'm going to say, okay, well, there's 10. I'm going to divide it by another unit fraction. Well, let's say I take 1/4. Well, 10 divided by 1/4 is going to equal 40. All right, it's going to be 40. And so the question I'm answering is the second quotient, here's my second quotient, less or greater than the original number? Well, where's the original number that I started with? The original number I started with was 5. And yes, 40 is greater than 5. So even though I started out with only 5 of something, and I cut them in half and got 10, and then I took those 10 and cut those into fourths and got 40. All right, so what does that tell me? Well, it tells me that it is a greater number that I ended up with here by cutting it into smaller pieces. But we can also remember that those pieces that I have are getting smaller and smaller each time I chop them up again. Okay, so good luck on these other problems. You're going to do 11. And then on 261, you're going to do 4, 5, 6, and 7. All right, good luck on those and see you tomorrow.